Are you having a good day? Huh?
Why are you here then?
A good day. We're going to tell the author what to put in the book. A good day is often one fueled by sunshine, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a helpful thing. So I'm really delighted to have Caroline here. Thank you for joining us. Caroline and I worked together in a pointy-headed consulting company many years ago. I've just about recovered, I think, but we'll find out more in a second. Caroline's got an amazing background, initially as an economist and a consultant, and spent a lot of time, I think, working with organizations on performance, and we'll learn more about what she's been doing. It's great to have such a big turnout, and I'd really like to have quite a lot of this session with you asking questions about what you see struggling with. There might be things that are particular to Google. For example, being on a late-night video call with California. I struggle to maintain my energy, and I'm sometimes cranky. I read an advanced copy of Caroline's book, and one of the things she talks about in there is when you're cranky, say, you know what, I'm a bit tired, and I might be coming across a bit cranky, apologies. And I did that, and turns out that was really helpful. So I'm now no longer the grumpy guy. I'm the guy who's understandably tired because it's midnight in London. So on that note, Caroline,
Fantastic.
Can I just start by asking you, what does a good day look like? What does a good day look like?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book was that, as you say, I used to work a lot with companies to help them shift their culture in a more positive direction. And I found that the best way to actually find out what was really going on under the hood was often to simply ask the three simple questions. What's a good day for you? What does a bad day look like? And how do you get more of the good days? So the book is built around the things that I heard.
What did
obviously.
you hear?
So what did I hear? I heard we want to be sure that we're working on the right things. Mm-hmm. We want to be sure that we are being productive in pursuit of those priorities. We want to, because you get to the end of the day and you feel like you've tackled only the urgent rather than the important. There's a sense of a gap, and you feel over time that something is really missing. There's definitely something about just knocking the ball out of the park on the tasks.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different colours to that. There's the interaction, the quality of the interaction. There's feeling that you're at your best, even perhaps when you're at 12 o'clock on a video conference call. And then there's feeling that you're having impact with everything that you're saying and doing. And then there's just the kind of topping up the tank. How do you make sure that you've got the resilience to deal with the ups and downs, and that you've got the energy to leave you at the end of the day feeling like you've got a little bit left in the tank. Right. So these were the themes that came through again and again and again. And it's less about saying, the job is amazing, because of course you want to be in a great job, of course. But so many people are in really great jobs, and the day-to-day existence is wearing a bit miserable from time to time, stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
maybe we should ask the audience, what does a good day look like? What kind of things make a good day for you guys?
Progress, right.
Progress, making progress. Yeah. What else? Good discussion.
Right.
Work with good people. Anything else? Have some fun. That's one wasn't on your list.
Energy. I talked about energy. Yeah, I mean, people are different. I mean, Google is very, very fun, right? So energy for you definitely looks like fun. Mm-hmm. Energy at the pointy-headed management consulting firm maybe looks a little different, just saying.
So, but you spent some time, and obviously, as you say in the book, and you just said, you were kind of asking people those basic questions. What's a good day? What's a bad day? How could you have more good days? Which is really a kind of coaching approach, I guess.
Yes.
What then led you to bringing that together with a bunch of research and science?
Well, I was an economist, and the reason that I'd gone into economics was because I thought it was a human science. I thought it was a rigorous way of thinking about human potential. And over time, the human bit of that kind of really faded. I mean, the work got more and more technical. And so I actually went into consulting because I wanted to focus on organizational change. But I never lost the interest in an evidence-based approach, which I guess many of you in the room would, also support. And so much in the field of human development and coaching and so on, there's a little bit of an arm-waving kind of feel to it. Mm-hmm. And yet there's so much amazing evidence that comes out of neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics that it often just doesn't make the leap from the labs into real life. Yeah. And I found that I'd be talking to a client about why they might want to think about how to give their team a bit more autonomy. and talking to them about the psychological research on the importance of autonomy as a motivating force would do more to shift their micromanaging behaviour than any staff survey results.
Yep.
Understanding the science and the rigour underneath it. So over time, I just realised that there was a huge opportunity to help people embrace changes which were going to make them more effective and more and happier, frankly.
That might be one of the reasons I found the book interesting is, as Googlers, we're all about understanding the facts.
Yeah.
And I think there is sometimes you feel that coaching and some of the things you read about how to perform well are a bit, as you said, arm-wavy. That's a good phrase. But you've drawn on psychology, you've drawn on behavioural economics, you've drawn on neurology. Can you tell us a bit more about what they call technically the science bit?
Yeah. I mean, these are all disciplines that basically look at how and why we think, feel, and behave as we do. And actually, all three of those disciplines have parts which don't focus on that. So I look at the behavioural neuroscience, the behavioural psychology, and the behavioural economics. I mean, the boundaries between the three are very, very blurry, if anyone is in this space, in this room. You know, I have a friend called Molly who, she's a neuroscientist. I mean, there's no doubt she's a neuroscientist, but she works on topics that are very focused on areas that psychologists have explored for years, altruism. Mm-hmm. And yet she also has worked in behavioural economics labs, so she introduces herself sometimes as a behavioural economist. Right. So, you know, there's this sort of mass of people who are just interested in really explaining why you might feel tired at 12 p.m.
Yep.
on a video conference call, why that might then make you feel grumpy.
I'm quite grumpy normally, but it's
are
even
you?
more grumpy.
No, you're
yeah,
not.
that's true.
No.
It's all a front.
No.
Okay, so let's just introduce some of the concepts, and I think people will be familiar with some of them. We'll maybe go from there to how you apply them. The two-system brain.
Yes.
What is that?
So we have lots of systems in the brain that interact, lots and lots. And actually a systemic approach to describing the way the brain works is much more the way that neuroscientists now talk about the brain rather than a specific piece of the brain doing one specific task. There's almost no part of the brain where you can say, this part of the brain does this. Mm-hmm. So we take a systemic approach these days. And two big systems, the names I give them are deliberate system and automatic system. So the deliberate system is the part of the brain that's responsible for you listening to us right now. So it's conscious attention, it's conscious reasoning, it's self-control, it's what's stopping you from standing up and saying, I don't agree, or frowning when you're actually trying to be really positive in a conversation. It's emotional self-regulation. It is also planning and forward thinking. So it's all the grown-up stuff, basically. The problem is that it's quite limited in capacity. So it can only do one thing at a time. It's comparatively slow.
Can I check? So is it true that it can only do one thing at a time? Is it?
Yes.
So multitasking is multi-failing, is it?
Multi-failing. I wish I'd spoken to you before I wrote the book. That's a good phrase. Yeah, multi-failing.
Second edition.
Yeah. So the brain, so the conscious deliberate system can only single task.
And that applies in both genders, just to check.
Yeah, you know, that often comes up. Yes, yeah? Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
That's good to know.
Yes. and there's fascinating research that suggests the more confident you are that you can multitask, the worse you are at it, because you've lost. Yeah, I know, because you're all thinking, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but I'm the exception. I'm the exception. And actually, there's some evidence out there on supertaskers. There are a few people whose brains are different, but I never like mentioning it, because as soon as you do, a bunch of people in an audience like this think, yeah, I'm super tough. But the truth is, it's a really small proportion of people. It's a tiny, tiny proportion. And for most of us in this room, when we try to do more than one thing at once, our deliberate system is actually switching attention from one thing to another. It's doing it so fast you don't realize it, but in those switches, you lose time and mental energy, which is why you actually are slower in performing a task, and you make between 2 and 4 times as many errors when you multitask. So, yes, where were we?
So we were talking about the two-system brain, and I wanted to talk a bit about that and then what implications it has for... Yeah, so what's the other one?
So the automatic system, well, it's not just... I mean, you know, it's just... it's the unsung hero because we're not conscious of it. So by definition, it's below the level of our consciousness. And it's doing so much to lighten the load on the deliberate system. It's filtering out most of what you see and hear around you to make sure that your deliberate system, which can only process part of reality, only gets to see or hear part of reality, which means the automatic system is editing everything that you experience.
So this is the thing, those who've seen the video on YouTube where you're asked to count the number of ball passes. Have you seen this one? And at the end of it says, so did you see the gorilla?
Yeah.
If you haven't done that, it's really worth doing.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there.
That's what's going on all the time. In fact, so
okay.
There's another study which is an homage to that, that study, which had a bunch of radiologists at Harvard go through a stack of lung scans, sadly genuine lung scans. And their job is to spot abnormalities. On the last of the lung scans, there was a picture of a gorilla printed. How many of the radiologists saw the gorilla? Well, it's not far off. 83% of the radiologists did not see the gorilla, even though eye tracking devices showed that they looked directly at it, and even though the gorilla was 44 times the size of the average lung nodule. Why did they not see the gorilla? Because the automatic system decides what to filter out based on what you've decided is already important, what's top of mind for you. Mm-hmm. So whatever you've decided is your priority, your aim, whatever is your attitude or your assumptions will shape what you see and hear consciously. Head explodes moment, right? I mean, this means that you are all experiencing only part of reality at any given time.
I'm starting to lose it.
Stay focused. Stay focused.
There's an awful lot of science, and some of it quite recent, I think, around understanding those things. But what are the implications of that particular body of work for how we understand how to have a good day?
Yeah, and I suppose this is what I try to do. This research has been out there for quite a long time, but the implications are quite practical and quite real for us. It means that if we take a moment before, and it really does have to be like 5 seconds, before we go into a meeting, or a conversation, or even a task, and say, okay, what's most important to me? What really matters in this? Check in with your attitude and your assumptions, because you know that's going to shape your reality. And then decide, well, what do I really want to notice in this? So imagine you're going to a conversation with someone you think is a bit of a jerk. I mean, I know that would never happen here, right? Imagine you're going into a conversation with someone who you think is going to be a bit grumpy, let's say. And you know that going in and assuming they're going to be a jerk means that you're going to see everything that confirms that they are a jerk. If you decide to notice every opportunity for collaboration or every opportunity, every sign that they are actually a human being, you'll see and experience the conversation differently. So that's what I call setting intentions, because you have to give these things a label. That's the label I give it.
Setting intentions, and that concept is it confirmation bias, where you're expecting to see something and therefore you pick up all the instances.
Yeah,
just like when you hear a word for the first time and it suddenly seems to be everywhere.
Exactly, absolutely. And the umbrella term for the fact that we only perceive part of reality is selective attention, for those who like this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Selective attention. And there are a bunch of different biases that sit underneath it. Inattentional blindness, confirmation bias being two of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and then another concept. So we've got the two-system brain and the neurology behind that. Another system, the concept you talk about is defending and discovering.
Yes.
What is all that?
So you know when you're freaking out and you're not thinking as clearly? That's that. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. So our brains, the automatic system, apart from filtering out reality so that our deliberate system doesn't crash in the face of all the information around us, it also keeps us safe. And one of the ways that it does that, it has a system which responds to threats. And what happens is that it perceives a threat in the environment. It launches something which you probably know of as a fight or flight response. It turns out there's also a freeze response, which is where you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. And when you do that, when you're in that defensive mode, when your brain is responding to keep you safe, it's diverting some attention, some energy from your prefrontal cortex to this basic defensive response. So the result is, as you're faced with a threat, you're actually getting slightly dumber, even when the threat is as small as having your toes trodden on a little bit or being faced with a task that just feels a bit insurmountable. So if we can become a lot more attuned to when we're in defensive mode and have a few tricks to get ourselves out of defensive mode, we make ourselves smarter when we really need to.
So I found this really interesting in the context of work, because you're often in a situation, in a meeting or something, where you feel, well, I haven't got credit for what I've done, or they don't understand.
Yeah.
And you can
Exactly,
see yourself going into, when you're conscious of it, you can see yourself going into that mode, and you're saying then you're getting dumber.
Yeah. It's a shame, right? Because it's often at the moment you most need to, rise to the challenge.
So what can I do when I'm in that situation?
Yeah.
This is me, midnight.
Hypothetically,
There's
yes.
15 people the other end. They're all joking, and they're not paying attention to what I need to get done.
Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing generally that you can do in meetings and conversations, which is to say, and it's a really super quick way of getting out of defensive mode, is to say, what's the ideal situation here? And what's my first step towards that? So if you're feeling underappreciated, and it's just having a go-to question in your pocket, like, okay, what do I really want to have happen here? What's the ideal situation? And what's the smallest first step towards that? I think that really helps. I think another general thing I would say about getting yourself out of defensive mode is, if you can sprinkle a few rewards around yourself, then that is a very good way of engaging.
What is that, chocolate? What do you mean?
Well, do you know, it kind of, so the reward system does respond to food and other very physical.
This is the other end from defend. This is
right.
now into sort
so
of discovery.
this is discovery mode. So this is where your brain is more focused on rewards than it's focused on threats. So rewards, of course, yes. I mean, chocolate is it stands there.
That
as
works.
Obviously, yes. But obviously, in the work context, more profound rewards are more powerful. So thinking about the fact that we are very social animals, a sense of connection and belonging is very rewarding to us. Thinking about the fact that we're intellectual animals, a sense of interest and novelty is very powerful. So a great question to give yourself one of those rewards is to say, what can I learn from this? When you're in that moment, what can I learn from this? It stimulates the neurochemistry of reward by saying, okay, I'm going to find something interesting in this. And just by doing that, you can often do enough to pull yourself out of defensive mode.
So definitely, for me anyway, being aware when that's happening is really helpful.
Yeah.
So you can say, okay, I can see what's happening here. I'm getting dumber. I need to stop. But then also when you're in the position of sometimes putting somebody inadvertently in a defensive position, you can try to pull them out of it by offering a reward. I've noticed people doing this. There's people in meetings who are really good at saying, yeah, Matt made a great point earlier and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I have no idea what point I made, but I just feel good.
Absolutely.
And so I'm like, great, yeah, I'm going to agree with that.
Another category of rewards is absolutely
It's true, isn't it?
making people feel good.
It works.
It really does work. It works because another category of rewards is sort of about our self-respect. And big things that sit under that are competence, autonomy, having a sense that you know what you're doing and you've got space to do it. So absolutely, showing appreciation is one of the quickest ways of getting someone out of defensive mode and into what I call discovery mode.
Yeah, anybody who's a parent will know that.
Yeah, yeah. Well done, well done.
Yeah, that was great.
That was great, well
now
done.
put your shoes
Yes.
on. And then the third piece, so we had the discover and defend, the two-system brain. The third piece that you make great play of is really the connection between our mind and our body. And again, it's sort of obvious, but you kind of expect somehow at work to be able to perform fine, regardless of sleep and exercise and so on and so forth. That's what this is about, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think we all know that when we're underslept, we're not as smart. And I think we know that it's hard to be witty when we're short of sleep. We know in some sense that there is a connection. But we so often treat our bodies as if they're just kind of nice-looking containers for our brain. That maybe we look after ourselves, purely for aesthetic reasons. And actually, the evidence is just mounting year after year on just how. So, for example, you're a sportsman. It turns out you don't have to be a rower in order to get the cognitive benefits of exercise. 20 minutes is enough. 20 minutes of aerobic activity of some sort. Oh, but it turns out actually even 10 minutes is going to boost your focus and attention and your emotional resilience. Oh, it turns out actually you can break it up into even smaller chunks. So the research is becoming very, very encouraging for people busy people who find it hard to fit this stuff into their days.
And it can be as simple as just getting up and walking around, not having meetings that last more than 45 minutes or an hour.
Yes,
kind of thing.
I love that, by the way. So I have been advocating for quite a while this idea of setting meetings that are shorter than the hour or shorter than the half hour. And I just saw recently that you have this speedy meetings function that's now in Google Calendar. I mean, hats off.
It books short meetings. Doesn't mean to say the meetings end up. It's a little nudge, I think.
Yeah, it is a very, very helpful nudge because what we also know about the deliberate system is that it gets better at taking decisions when it's had a break. So the longer that it is since you've had a break, the less good the quality of your choices and decisions are. That's been shown with judges sitting on a parole board. It's been shown with.
So you're better off going before the judge earlier in the day, are you?
Definitely.
Okay.
I mean, just in case that's ever relevant. And if you've got a big...
That's certainly my job.
Yeah, if you've got a big decision that you need to make it after a break rather than before a break. If you need any reminding that taking breaks is important, remember that your brain is doing a lot of encoding and consolidation in the period where it steps away from a task. Mm-hmm. Downtime is not laziness. Downtime is actually like a pit stop for a racing car.
And is it real, the notion that, I get all my best ideas when I'm in the bath or when I'm walking or cycling, that kind of thing?
No, it is real. I think there's a lot of still research into exactly what goes on. Something called the default mode network in the brain. I said there were lots of systems. So everybody in neuroscience is interested in the fact that there is this part of the brain that is active when we're not apparently doing anything. There's definitely plenty of evidence to suggest that when people step away from a task and then return to it, we come back with fresh insight. So I have a waterproof pad in the shower, which I know I'm probably revealing too much. But anyway, there we are. I have a waterproof pad in the shower because that time.
That's when the ideas come to you.
That liminal space, yeah. Absolutely.
Liminal?
Yes.
What does that mean?
In between things.
Yep.
Yes.
Spaces in between things. Okay, that sounds good. And then, so taking all of these things together and all the observation of all the kind of crazy organisations that you've worked in, you've sort of tried to draw out some general tips, ideas, thoughts on how we can have a better day. Yeah. So what are the key concepts there? You've mentioned some, but tell us a bit more about what's the toolkit?
Well, I always struggle when people ask me that because I did try to make this a book that kind of covers everything. So there are so many tips and so many so many pieces of advice in there. I do think that this setting intentions thing is really at the foundation because if you can shape the way that reality feels, that's pretty great. I mean, it can change the way that every conversation feels.
Can you give us a sort of story or an example of that? Just bring that to life. So what does that mean?
Yeah, well, actually, this might involve someone you know.
Okay.
I don't know whether you knew him or not. So there was the time that this came home to me was I had a meeting that I was on a project I didn't want to be on, basically. I don't know if any of you have ever had that situation happen to you. I was on a project that I knew was a good thing to do, but I wasn't excited about it. And I was working alongside a colleague called Lucas. I call him Lucas. And he was gung-ho about the project. And he was in picture kind of tall, wiry, German, well-dressed, very excited. And it was the first day that we were meeting the clients. And we were in this long, dark room with low ceiling, but less pleasant than this, obviously. And it was a video conference room. And I realized that the clients weren't even there. They were on the screen. It was a kick-off meeting with the clients, but they were actually not even in the room. I was grumpy about being there. I thought it was a terrible, terrible setup to start the project. And I struggled, I have to say. I thought it was a bad meeting. I saw lots of people frowning, lots of kind of disagreements. And I thought it was such a bad meeting that I really felt like I had to call it out and speak to Lucas about this terrible start to the project. And when I did that, I had this really strange conversation. And it basically went like this. I thought that was a terrible meeting. This, then this happened. I don't know what you're talking about, Caroline. This, and this happened. He'd seen progress. He'd seen smiles. He even reminded me of times that people had laughed. I had no recollection of it. I mean, none. I mean, we had different personalities, so there was a little bit of that, but No, it was a huge eye-opener. And it was actually after that I really started thinking about applying the science to actually, what does it actually look like to think about selective attention?
So the smiles and all that was the gorilla for you?
That was the gorilla,
You were looking
absolutely.
for all the negative?
I was looking for all the negativity. I was looking for every frown, every confirmation that I was right, that this was a terrible idea, probably a dumb project, and by the way, could I have some more coffee, you know? Yeah, so that was actually a big wake-up call for me.
And so, given that experience, what would you have done differently? What do you do differently now?
Yeah, so what I do differently is I do this little routine. I mean, I would have said, my real aim here is to make a contribution to the warmth and connection that's possible here. Because I was being put on the project because I do all the people stuff. So
you used to have people who only did people stuff because everybody else was so bad with people, didn't they? Remember that?
That's right, and I'm an economist, right? So I was being put on as the people person. So yeah, you know, I should have refocused. I would have refocused, and I did in subsequent meetings. My aim here is to bring what's missing. I would have checked in, and I do check in with my attitude. If I'm really grumpy, I check in and say, okay, is this going to serve me? Because it is going to shape what I experience. And I say, no. Can I park it? Is there a way of challenging any assumptions? And the assumption would have been to challenge. It's a terrible way to set up a client project to have a video conference. But maybe we would have taken a month longer to meet in person.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems obvious now, right? But if you come in with a certain mindset, you perceive everything in a certain light. So now, every day, I mean, before I come on stage, I think, okay, what really matters? You know, where am I at? What do I want to notice? And the thing I probably do most often is when I'm feeling a bit stressed, if I'm on my way into work, I'll say, okay, let me notice 2 or 3 good things. Because once that's top of mind, then I'll see more. So that's a really good way of resetting your mood.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to come to you and have any questions or thoughts or like therapy, like any things. I feel like I'm in therapy now, so I'm slightly.
You can talk about a friend's situation if you want to.
Yeah. But while you think about that, another thing that struck me is this concept you have of sort of assuming the best of people in situations. So I talk a lot about this with our teams. It's very easy in our organisation, which is multifunctional and multifaceted, to just go, oh, if only those guys over there could get their shit together, then I'd be fine. And why on earth are they doing that? They must be idiots.
Yeah.
And then you sort of have to remind yourself, and we remind each other, that actually everybody's good and smart, and they're probably doing that with a good intention. The impact on you might be different. So just talk about how we handle that.
That's a good point. So there's something in psychology called a fundamental attribution error. It's a great title. I mean,
I'm going to write that down. Fundamental attribution.
It's often capitalized as well. A fundamental attribution error. So remember, your deliberate system doesn't have much capacity. Remember that your automatic system is trying to keep things simple as much as possible. One of the biggest simplifications it makes is it says, okay, if you're not getting stuff done today, it's simpler for me to assume that you're just no good than it is to say, I wonder what might be going on with her. It takes less mental energy. So the fundamental attribution error describes the phenomenon that when we aren't firing on all cylinders, we think about the situation and the circumstances that's created that. When we see someone else who's not firing on all cylinders, we say, okay, you're no good. And it's simple, but it's also easy to challenge, which is just simply the phrase I use is good person, bad circumstances. It's to get into the habit when you see someone who's doing something dysfunctional or isn't where you want them to be, is to say, okay, good person, bad circumstances, which looks in practice like, what on earth could be creating this? And you can have some fun with it, because the story that you make up doesn't even have to be true to shift your behavior towards them, which is likely then to not put them so much on the defensive, which will improve their behavior. You get into a nice virtual circle.
Well, that sounds intriguing. So tell me, what's a story you make up about somebody? I mean, without being too revealing.
No, I mean, if you're dealing with someone who's really difficult, then thinking about, I wonder what kind of childhood they had, and having some fun with that, What could possibly have created this, attention to the font size on this slide? What happened to them in school at 11? And as soon as you start thinking about that, and you've got a slight smile on your face, and then you're feeling better about, you're chuckling to yourself about some teacher throwing a pen at their head or something. And then your demeanor shifts.
Yeah.
And then you end up in a different place because they're less, because if you're aggravated, you're going to put them on the defensive, which will mean that all of the functions of their deliberate system will decline. So self-control, thinking, they'll become dumber and less nice to be around.
So by assuming the best, you can help other people be their best as well.
And that does sound a bit Pollyanna-ish. I mean, I have had people say, oh, you're just trying to say that everyone's amazing. I'm not.
So how often do you have to have these kind of situations where somebody's showing up and, what you said, good person, bad circumstances?
Yeah.
How many times does that happen before you go, actually, bad person? Good person, bad circumstance, good person, bad circumstance, good person, bad circumstance, go fundamentally
You know what?
bad.
Whatever, yeah. So there is a section in the book for that, where what I say is, sometimes it takes too much effort to dig the good out. And there does come a point where it's helpful to just minimize your exposure. And if you can't do that, then to think systematically about how do you reduce the sense of threat to them. What are the ways that you can make them feel more competent, more autonomous, and that you do this with people who are senior to you, right? How do you make them feel good? How do you make sure that you're being super clear so that uncertainty is a threat to most people's brains? How do you minimize uncertainty? So there are a number of really quite tactical things you can then flip into.
If you have somebody who you're stuck with, who you just have a sort of fundamental underlying problem with, you're saying, like, manage that as best you can.
Yes, absolutely. And there's lots that we know about, reducing the sense of threat. And as I say, there's basically a list, a checklist you can go down.
That's in the book, I remember.
It is, apparently.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Anybody got any questions, suggestions, scenarios, or advice that they need? Do you want to take? If you can take the mic, then great. If not, shout out.
Hi.
Hello.
Based on what you said about multitasking and how we can't really do that, what are your thoughts, or do you have any data on people's effectiveness in meetings where nowadays everyone's got a laptop and a phone and sort of doing multiple things at the same time? Is that working, or is it?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, and there's a challenge because a lot of people, and I'm sure many of you, like to take notes on your devices. I'm a great fan of airplane mode. I've long been a fan of using technology to improve our relationship with technology. I did a podcast earlier on this week where the discussion was exactly that. Is technology bad? And I was like, no, technology is neutral. Every time technology advances, like the post office and the phone, and certainly even back as far as the printing press, people say, oh my goodness, this is disastrous. It's going to ruin our relationships and our ability to concentrate. But then what happens is that we get better. We learn how to use the technology. So I think that if people are in meetings, it is really helpful to have them close their laptops. If they do want to take notes on a device, to put it on airplane mode. I actually have I use a smartphone daycare box, or smartphone creche in the UK, which I invite people to put their phones in. I was running a workshop on Tuesday where I just put this box and I wrote smartphone daycare. And the people afterwards said, we didn't put our phones in the box, but it gave us the prompt to just leave them in our bags.
Interesting.
And it was enough to just remind people that there was a different quality of conversation that was going to happen if we weren't constantly distracted.
Yeah. How much more stupid do we get when we're trying to multitask?
Well, between 2 and 4 times as many errors is pretty bad,
2
right?
to 4 times as many errors?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I know Caroline. I've been at some of these workshops she's talking about, so I've employed a lot of these techniques. It's good to refresh myself. I wondered if you could talk about authenticity a little bit and transparency, because I think a lot of us strive to be very authentic in our leadership, and yet some of these things can seem a little bit cerebral. And so when you're having these interactions, how do you kind of balance out wanting to be authentic with sort of doing all this microprocessing in your head about what's happening?
Good question.
Well, it's a good question. I think whenever we stretch ourselves to do something new, there's something about that feels inauthentic. Like by definition, as soon as you try a new technique or a new way of running a meeting or a new way of planning a project, it feels a bit uncomfortable. And when we were kids and we were trying to learn to ride a bike, we pedaled and we pedaled and we fell off. We pedaled and we pedaled and we fell off. We kept on trying until it worked out. In the days before the fact that you could get song lyrics on the internet used to try and learn the song lyrics. You're way too young to know what I'm talking about, but
I remember that.
you remember, yeah. And you're listening, you're trying to write it down. You're like, the persistence we had as kids was gorgeous and remarkable. And everything we know about neuroplasticity suggests that repetition really is what strengthens neural pathways associated with a new behavior. So there's a little bit of that moment where you're trying something new and it is going to feel inauthentic because it's new. And I suppose what I would say is at that point, stay focused on your good intentions. Don't worry if it doesn't work out the first time, or the second time, or the third time. Ask yourself the rewarding question, which is, what am I learning from this? What am I learning from this? And the rewarding question, which is, what's working about this? And what can I do more of next time? So I suppose I'm encouraging you to hold that space where things feel a bit inauthentic and know that that's part of the learning process of any sort.
That's fantastic, because basically you're saying we're all developing,
Yeah.
and therefore you're always going to be trying new things and trying.
Yeah, and I think everyone in this room is the sort of person who always wants to learn new things, and there is that sort of discomfort when you're you're out of your comfort zone. And I believe that the sorts of questions that you can ask yourself about what am I learning, what worked about that, helps you not to get into your terror zone.
Terror zone. Anybody else? Any other questions? Gerald.
Hi, thanks very much. So a lot of what you talked about is what we can do as individuals, and I wondered if you had top tips when you were talking to either teams or even organisations of what the top tips for a group are, basically.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I did write about the individual because I do think that it's very hard to be a great leader unless you're managing yourself as effectively as you're managing your teams and your organisations. I quite strongly believe that all of the techniques that we're talking about today can be used with teams. It does take a little bit of a step, to decide that you're going to run a meeting, perhaps which you run every week in a slightly different way, and thinking, everyone's going to say, why are we starting by talking about what the ideal is and what the steps are towards that? We just need to fix the problem. But I strongly believe that all of these techniques can be applied. In fact, they become much stronger and much more powerful when they become team norms. And I think you guys are very experimental. You're willing to try new things, and you're known for being very exploratory and figuring out what can help people be at their best. So I would encourage you to try these things in your teams to see what changes in the quality of the discussions that you have.
That's great. Other questions or thoughts? Anybody? So I have a question about productivity. Just as Dave's trying to make his way to the microphone. You talk about productivity
Yes.
In the book. We haven't really touched on that. How can we all be more productive apart from not
Single
multitasking?
tasking.
Single tasking
Yeah.
is the best thing.
Oh, it's a
But there's
pretty
also,
strong-
you mentioned something about the sort of switching costs between tasks as well, which is interesting.
Yeah,
so like doing batches rather than doing individual emails, that kind of
I
thing.
think as far as you can, that's another good point. So, when we're talking about single tasking, we've talked so far about going offline, staying offline, but actually there's another way that you can reduce the switching costs. You really have read the book. This
I
is
really have
wonderful.
read the book. I don't do this when I don't read the book.
I know, but it's wonderful. It feels, yeah. So the other thing that you can do to reduce the amount of time your brain is switching from one thing to the other. Actually, let me try some. Can I try something with the audience? Okay.
Yes, then not me.
Yeah, that's right. So
Don't put me in the threat zone.
no.
But then you're in the fear zone now, audience. Get in the fear zone.
You don't have to get up or do anything much, I promise. So if you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as quickly as you can on my mark and with some energy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Then you say A, B, C, D, F, G, similarly energetic. A, B, C, D, F, G. Fantastic. So crisp, like a cult. Wonderful. Okay. Now, I'd like you to mix the two up. I'd like you to say A1, B2, C3, D4, which should take basically the same amount of time as... Okay? Go. I love the fact you just gave up.
Epic fail. Why?
Why? Because you're switching from numbers to letters, to numbers to letters. And so the advice that comes out of that is the more that you can batch similar types of tasks together, the quicker you will get through them.
Oh.
So for me, I like to think about different zones in my day. Doesn't always work because obviously you have unexpected stuff. But being a late night person, I actually find that my peak time for creative, thoughtful work is actually the afternoon. You will never see that anywhere written down because all of the advice is tuned for early morning people. But I know that, and so I do all my meetings and calls in the morning. And it doesn't always work quite like that, but that's what I aim for. And then I also have email blitzes in the morning and the afternoon. I stay online, except when I'm going offline to do my deep thinking. But I really blitz my email morning and evening, and that just reduces the time it takes.
Top tip. Next question.
So much of what you talked about is having a good day at work. Obviously, the other part of having a good life is what goes on outside of work. What are the key things you've discovered which you think are transferable to life outside of work and difficult social situations? Personally thinking of the school gate, which seems to be the most toxic environment I've ever encountered.
You have got children, just to be clear.
I do.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. I wasn't browsing, no, man. What in the terror zone here, by the way? What could I transfer and particularly help my good lady wife with, who seems to experience that more than I do?
It's a great question. Actually, the book at one point was called How to Have a Good Day at Work, but because it became so obvious that all of this advice is just as relevant with your families and your friends, we reframed it, actually. The examples in the book are about professional situations, but good person, bad circumstances, incredibly helpful in family situations, right?
Yeah.
Someone is behaving in a certain way, and you think, okay, well, what might have happened with them? And actually, I have to say, lots of my clients say that they test things out on their children before they start to use them with their colleagues. There was a particular pattern I started to see of men talking about their relationships with their teenage daughters. And specifically, they often homed in on the advice about giving them autonomy, which of course doesn't look like just saying, just do what you want, darling. But asking them questions rather than telling them what to do. And saying, what do you think is the right way to go about this? What makes you think that? What would be another approach? And the fact is that the things that we've been talking about today are very deep and very universal. So the power of autonomy works even with a 13-year-old girl or a 15-year-old girl. Hard to believe, perhaps. But these things are very translatable.
Recognise that. Any follow-up? You're happy with that?
I'm very happy with that. The interesting thing, I often try some of these things at home, and my wife's stock response is now, don't try and Google me.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
I'll keep trying.
You need to find someone else. Try it on your children.
I'll try it on myself. He's much more pliable, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a client of mine who is an Italian guy, and he had a small child, very small, and his wife was concerned that he wasn't speaking as early as they were hoping. And so Francesco said, I'm going to try this approach of really listening and then playing back what the child is saying and then adding one or two new words into what I'm saying. So using what they've said, but then adding a few words. So giving this sort of child a sense of competence because you're using the same words, and then sort of just stretching them slightly by adding in a few more. And it did accelerate the little one's language acquisition after that point. I mean, these things are so fundamental and so basic. So yes, have a go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I want to talk a little bit more about the mind-body energy thing, if you can. We talked a bit about productivity earlier. Other things that we can notice about ourselves or others in that respect, and how do we keep up? The energy that we need, particularly here, I think is quite high. It's fast-paced. There's lots of change all the time, etc. How can we deal with that?
I do think that, I mentioned breaks earlier on. I do think being smart about planning strategic breaks is important as you look across the day. I do think taking every single opportunity to do a tiny bit of physical exercise. I mean, for me, honestly, I'm not a gym type of person. So walking as fast as I can, going for a walk around the block, even going for a walk up to a different floor.
So kind of check in on this. So there's something about just like moving, which
Yes.
helps you kind
Yeah.
of process things and stuff. Then, but you're sort of saying exercise, which is a notch up. It's not just that. There's something about elevating your heart rate and your breathing that's more than just moving.
It can be. I mean, you know, the evidence is really encouraging in this. I read this paper where the scientists were saying it was actually quite sort of colloquial language for a research paper, saying more exercise is better than less, but less exercise is better than none. Just this general sense that any activity is useful and stimulating. So the problem is often when you kind of, especially this time of year and you have these sort of New Year's resolutions, the risk is you set them here. And when you fail, you get this feeling of threat and disappointment. It's the opposite of reward. And then the reason that that's an issue is that reward is motivating. That's the way the reward system works in the brain. So you have a small success, you feel good about yourself, you feel motivated to try the next thing. So I would always encourage people to set very small, manageable goals. What is it that I actually think I can really do today? And then achieve that, feel great, and then do a tiny bit more if you want to. But it's always much better to do that from the perspective of neuroscience than it is to start big and work back.
Now, we're getting close to being out of time, and there's so much we haven't touched on, but one other area that we've touched on a bit, we haven't gone into so much depth on, is sort of the relationships that we have around the place, and how what you talked about in terms of the way the brain operates and so on affects relationships. What are the things that you've learned and that you advise us in that area?
Well, we've touched on a lot of the things that are relevant. So your intentions will shape the way you perceive people. The extent to which you present threat to them or reward to them will make a big difference to their behavior. But there are other things in the mix. There are very sort of fun and strange things in the mix. I mean, you all know, if we'd come on stage and we had been really visibly grumpy and stressed, what would have happened? There would have been this ripple effect where you'd all have been like, what's happened? What's going on? Same thing if you're in a meeting and someone grumpy comes in, it just kind of settles this cloud over the room. So research suggests, you're absolutely right, that within 5 minutes, people's emotions sync up. Even when you're not working on the same thing, and even when you don't even talk to each other. There's lots of disagreement in the behavioral sciences about why this happens. Because
so it definitely happens, facts,
but
we
it
don't know why.
definitely happens. I mean, so there are some who believe it's mirror neurons. Problem is mirror neurons haven't been found in human beings. The research has been done in monkeys. There's some.
Sorry, hang on. That sounds interesting. So
okay.
monkeys have got something we haven't. Or
No,
we don't know.
we almost certainly have them, but the research involves invasive explorations which have not been done in humans.
Right.
Right. So, but
that's something about telepathy, is it, or?
I mean, you'll read a lot in the popular press about mirror neurons and the existence of mirror neurons. The truth is that you can really wind up a neuroscientist very quickly by talking about mirror neurons.
Great.
But even without that, yes. Even without that, we know from psychology, years and years of research, that there is something called theory of mind. We have this ability to empathize. We have this ability to perceive the possibility someone else has a mind different to ours. After the age, well, there's a particular age as a child where you start to imagine that someone is different to you. Some executives have never quite got there, but yes, there's definitely this idea that we are built social animals, we are built to sync up with people around us. So just knowing that the way you go into a conversation has an enormous effect on the people around you. And there have been times when I've been in a meeting that's going south, and there's a point where I think, well, I can get irritated or worried about this, or I can recognize that I can be a little bit of a force for good at this moment, whatever the science is underneath it, and say, okay, what do I want to radiate into the room? And just try and bring something to mind that actually puts you in that state.
And this whole thing about, if I smile, then I become happier. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, there's this sort of two-way flow in the central nervous system, which is quite weird. So when we're happy, we tend to smile. When we're relaxed, we tend to breathe deeply. When we're confident, we tend to stand tall. And it seems that the relationship goes the other way around as well. So when we mimic the activities associated with being happy, relaxed, and confident, again, debate on exactly how this works. Our brain interprets that as a signal we can be happy, confident, relaxed. And so smiling, yes, a little bit of, finding a reason to smile, even if it's a bit lame, can quickly end up...
I'm very self-conscious now.
No, yeah, I know. Hey.
So there's some great training I think some people have done called Taking the Stage, which we run here, which is brilliant. It's actually partly about that. It's like how do you kind of fake presence, which then gives you the confidence to...
quickly becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's really, really powerful.
Absolutely.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I think we're almost completely out of time. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us today. It's a great book. I recommend the read, and thank you very much, Caroline Webb.
Thank you so much. Thank you.